We have with us a very special guest, Mr. M. Damodaran, former SEBI Chairman and also the Chairperson of Excellence Enable. The one voice that clearly the markets always want to listen, and clearly he is always articulate when it comes to putting out his opinions and putting out his views. Mr. Damodaran, as always, thanks for sparing this time and speaking
Thank
to
you.
ET
Thank
now.
you.
So I'm speaking to you on a day clearly when we are celebrating the 1 year of demonetization. Whatever may be the political debates, arguments, counter arguments, but from a financial service or the financial world perspective, do you think the demonetization in that sense was beneficial from a short term and perhaps from the long term perspective for the financial service sector in the country?
Let me attempt a very brief telegraphic answer. Short-term pains, long-term gains. Now it is clear that RBI was not caught by surprise because an insider's view has come out in the papers and RBI was part of the consultation process which went into this. Maybe the timing, some of them could have been caught on the back foot. I think it's broadly played out very well. Clearly, there have been pains in the short run. I still cannot understand, I didn't understand then, I don't understand now why the 2000 rupee note was necessary. If we had gone for the 200 rupee note then, as we have now done, it would have made a lot more sense. Going in for a high denomination note clearly didn't make sense to me.
Mr. Damodaran, if I could ask you, we all know you very soon, tomorrow and day after, would have your fourth year of the Gatekeepers of Governance Summit. Linking to that, now taking forward this argument, also we saw a lot of action when it comes to on the issue of corporate governance, wherein lakhs of companies were deregistered, many independent directors recognition was cancelled. So how do you see, clearly has the time come perhaps when this whole debate of shell companies and the corporate governance in them, perhaps the surveillance needs to be further enhanced from various agencies in the country? Perhaps the surveillance mechanisms are not up to the mark when it comes to detecting the shell companies at the right time?
See, securities market regulation is a bit like healthcare. There is the preventive aspect and there is a curative aspect. I personally believe that you need to do enough to prevent companies which have no business to come into existence, If everyone and his uncle sets up a company for the wrong reasons, clearly you're buying a problem which will play out in the long run and it will impact not just those who are stakeholders of that company, but it will have systemic implications, and you don't want that. So one is address it upfront, see why these companies ought to have existed. Two is all enforcement action must be quick and effective, but it must also be thought through well. You don't do something today and then reverse it tomorrow morning, because uncertainty is the last thing that an orderly marketplace or even orderly life wants. You want a certain amount of predictability, a certain amount of continuity and certainty. So you can't have an action today and some kind of a setback. Now, look at what's happening to the 200,000 plus directors who have been reportedly disqualified. I'm giving you the numbers which I read in the newspapers. And now it says the disqualification, I don't know whether it's official yet, but it says the disqualification will apply only in respect of the directorships of those companies that have defaulted. What really then is the disincentive for a director? I'm sure he or she doesn't want to have anything to do with a company that's already defaulted. So you move on, you can be on the boards of other companies. There should have been the observing of natural justice principles. There should have been due process before you remove people, and you should have removed a lesser number of people for good reasons, those that were in control, not that were peripherally associated with the company and had no manner of knowing what was going wrong. Somewhere I think we're taking out pragmatism and practicality from the enforcement actions as well as from regulatory prescriptions.
Mr. Damodaran, pragmatism and practical aspects, very important as you rightly mentioned, just referring to one of the recent instances where the Ministry of Corporate Affairs struck down more than 311 companies as shell companies, of which some were listed, and thereby market regulator SEBI got into the action mode. You know how SEBI functions, you have been a former SEBI chairman. Clearly the intentions were right, but clearly the questions were raised on how did SEBI go about it, with SAT pulling it up. In these situations, how do you see such issues should be dealt with, particularly the cases where clearly these companies were trading, the questions were also being raised. Why did not SEBI itself raise the alarm bells at the right time then?
You think they didn't know about it? Of course they knew about it. You didn't have to wait for somebody else to tell you that this was going wrong. Maybe they thought that it was a jurisdictional issue, this ought to come from the ministry. I'm less concerned about where it came from. I'm more concerned about the way it played out. You mentioned good intentions. There is no doubt that the intention was to clean up the place, and I think it needs a lot of cleaning up. I think cleaning up the corporate sector is a necessary element of Swachh Bharat. I think you got to clean that up. But you know, there's a saying I'm very fond of, that the way to hell is paved with good intentions. So intentions might be honorable. It is the manner of execution, it is what you do, when you do, and how you do it, that is at least as important. Now, when you pass an order and that order ceases to have any currency a little later, either because of appellate action or because you yourself have a change of mind, you're introducing, as I mentioned, uncertainty. And uncertainty is something that I don't think we need to live with. It's an avoidable nuisance.
Mr. Damodaran, the summit would happen at a time when we all know that the Kotak committee report is out in public. You have given your views. Clearly, it's been debated for almost a couple of months now. SEBI's deadline of asking for suggestions is also over. Do you think the big challenge will now be implementation? Because clearly there are a lot of dissent voice also coming in. So clearly the challenge for SEBI would be to implement these recommendations put in by the Kotak panel, particularly on the corporate governance issues.
I don't think dissent is a bad thing, because I think what democracy thrives on is discussion, debate, discourse, and dissent. You need all of this as elements of democracy, and this is a subset of democracy. Through a consultative process, you must arrive at what the right regulation is. And therefore, if some people have found fault with some of the recommendations, I think that's fair. SEBI will consider, I am sure, the suggestions it is receiving or must have received. I think November 4th was the last date. They must be looking at it, I am sure, because I'm told that a lot of recommendations have come in, a lot of suggestions and feedback has come in. And then decide on what needs to be implemented quickly, what can wait for a year. The committee itself has recommended certain timelines so that it's not disruptive, so that a fundamental change doesn't happen tomorrow morning. So you ease people into that particular change. And I think that is a positive for me. Has the committee traveled far enough? I've said this earlier also. I think the direction was right, the intent was right. Some of the recommendations were spot on. In fact, they should have come earlier, but I'm glad that this committee brought it out. Maybe they've fallen short on some recommendations. In fact, we brought out a newsletter on the committee where we have given the headline, Ye Dil Mange More. So we said we're happy with what we've seen, but I think we need to have seen a whole lot more in this report.
Mr. Damodaran, quickly, Ye Dil Mange More, as you're rightly putting out, I was speaking to you a year back exactly when we all know the issues of corporate governance that were raised at the house of Tatas. Then came Infosys. Now, just after a year, a lot of things have changed. Managements have changed. A lot of board rejig has happened at the Tatas or perhaps at Infosys. Do you think whatever happened, finally, what is the outcome? Is it satisfactory? Clearly, the way things have happened and the role of independent directors, some answers have come out and perhaps more answers needs to be answered by perhaps the board and these companies.
The minute we say that it is satisfactory, we have lost the battle, because governance will always be work in progress. You always need to keep doing something newer and better. Has change taken place? Yes, some corporate boardrooms have witnessed change. More importantly, I think from the outside, shareholders and other stakeholders have started to raise their voice and saying, we want to know what's going on in the company in which we have a stake, whether as a shareholder or as someone else who deals with the company. That's a positive change. Has there been enough of change across the board? No. I think change has happened or is happening. I would use the present continuous. Change is happening in a manner that can be absorbed, at a pace that can be absorbed, in companies which have either experienced these problems or see themselves as nearly identical to those that have witnessed it and say that I don't have to learn from my mistakes alone. If something has gone wrong somewhere else, clearly there is learning in it for me. But a lot more needs to happen in terms of understanding the management board interface, in terms of understanding that a shareholder, however big, is a shareholder and has no special rights, should not have special rights. And for a board to keep looking outside the boardroom for guidance, for direction, is something that doesn't appeal to me. The board is a seat of wisdom. It is a collection of individuals who are there because they bring wisdom to the table, and for them to, as a collective unit, keep looking outside for directions is something that I cannot buy.
Mr. Damodaran, my last question before I could let you go. As you're rightly pointing out, ye dil mange more, and secondly, time for having a Swachh Bharat Abhiyan when it comes to the whole of corporate sector. How do you see glass half empty, glass half full when it comes to corporate governance? And perhaps this coming decade would determine the way things will pan out when it comes to Indian corporate and the way the boards operate?
I'm an incorrigible optimist. I think the glass is 60% full. Why stop at half? But there's still 40%. And in all of this, the easier pickings are the ones that get done. The tougher decisions, the tougher implementation takes time. So it's as you get to the more difficult decisions, as you get to the recommendations that will take time, which will seem to be disruptive at one level, it's when you get there that you will find resistance, you will find difficulty in implementation. But the collective will of stakeholders across the corporate community is going to push for better reforms, better governance, not out of a sense of altruism. It is enlightened self-interest, because it is good governance that ultimately will lead to sustainable performance. This is a non-negotiable truth. In the short run, you can take shortcuts, but so long as you are on the straight and narrow path, you will succeed in the future.
Mr. Damodaran, once again, thanks a lot for spending this time. Pleasure talking to you as
Thank
always.
you. Thank you.